My name is Claire, I'm 30 years old, and I was lying completely still in the dark of my childhood bedroom when I heard my mother's voice come through the floor. The house had settled into its nighttime quiet, that particular stillness where the sounds that are always there become audible. The furnace, the old pipes, the specific creak of the third stair that had been creaking since I was 7. Her voice came through clearly, tight, controlled. The register she used when something had not produced the result she intended, and she was deciding what to do about that. Why didn't she eat it? A pause. Then Lauren's voice, quieter, with the uncertain quality she got when my mother was asking something she didn't have a satisfying answer for. She just kept pushing it around. Silence. Then my mother again, lower, and then the sound of a chair, and then footsteps, and then a door. I lay in the dark and I did not move. 2 weeks earlier, I had inherited $4.2 million. I did not know that yet. It should have felt like a normal night. It didn't. Before I explain what I mean by that, I need to give you the ground beneath it, because lying in that bedroom is not where this story begins, and the question through the floor is not something you can understand without knowing what the day had looked like before it. But first, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and your local time. I want to know who is in this room with me tonight. Now let me take you back. My mother has never been a warm woman. I want to say that plainly because the story requires it. Not as a wound I am carrying, as a fact I established in childhood and have carried since with the particular practicality of someone who has made peace with a condition they cannot change. Diane Whitmore is 57 years old. She is composed, precise, and manages her household and her relationships with the same organizational intelligence she applies to everything else in her life. She is not cruel. Cruelty requires a certain investment in the emotional experience of another person, and my mother does not invest there. She simply does not produce warmth except in the specific circumstances where warmth is the most efficient instrument available. I understood this by the time I was 12. By the time I was 20, I had stopped waiting for the circumstances to change. My sister Lauren is 34. She is 4 years older than me and has always existed in my mother's orbit with the easy alignment of someone who found the orbit comfortable. Not because she is a bad person, because she has never had a reason to examine the temperature of the room she was in. The room has always been warm for her. For me, it has been functional, managed. The warmth arrives when I am useful and recedes when I am not. I had been not particularly useful for most of my adult life in Chicago, building my career in financial analysis, building my apartment and my routines, and the particular quiet life of someone who has understood that the foundation will have to be her own. I called on birthdays. I visited at Christmas. I maintained the surface of the relationship because maintaining the surface was simpler than examining what was underneath it. My mother called occasionally. Lauren texted occasionally. The contact was enough to say it existed and not enough to require either party to be actually present with the other. That was how it had been for years, which is why Thursday felt wrong from the moment I arrived. I had driven down for a long weekend. Nothing specific had prompted it. A stretch of work that had been heavier than usual. A feeling that I needed a change of environment, and a phone call from my mother 2 weeks earlier that had been warmer than usual in a way I had noted without fully examining. She had called on a Tuesday evening, which was not her pattern. She had asked about my work and my life with the specific attentiveness of someone who was actually listening to the answers rather than waiting for their turn to speak. She had said at the end of the call that she missed me and that it would be nice if I came home sometime soon. She had said she missed me. My mother did not say she missed people. She said it would be good to see you, which was different, relational accounting rather than emotional expression. I had noted the deviation. I had not acted on it immediately, but it had sat with me, and 2 weeks later I had packed a bag for a long weekend and driven the 4 hours south. Lauren was already there when I arrived. She was sitting in the living room with a glass of wine, and she stood up when I came through the door and hugged me. Lauren and I did not hug. We did the thing that passes for a hug in our family, which is a brief press of arms and a pat on the back and then separation. We had been doing this for 20 years. It was our established physical language for arrival and departure. She held on. not briefly, for a genuine duration, the duration of an actual hug. I stood inside it for a moment and registered the deviation the same way I had registered my mother's phone call, something that did not match the established pattern, something that required a notation. She said it was so good to see me. She said I looked tired and that she was glad I had come down. She asked about the drive with the attentiveness of someone who was genuinely interested in whether the drive had been good. I answered what I answered, and I sat down, and I looked around the living room, which was the same living room it had always been, and I tried to locate the specific source of the feeling that had arrived the moment I walked through the door. The feeling was not unpleasant exactly. It was just wrong. The way a song is wrong when someone is playing it in the right key but at the wrong tempo. All the notes correct, something off underneath. My mother came in from the kitchen. She crossed the room and she put her hand on my face. She had not done that since I was a child. She said, "You look tired, sweetheart. I'm glad you're home." Sweetheart. My mother called Lauren sweetheart occasionally. It was not a word she used for me. I was Claire. Or she would catch my eye across a room and communicate what she needed to communicate without a name at all. I was never sweetheart. I said I was fine. I said the drive had been good. I sat down on the couch and I felt the specific alertness of someone whose pattern recognition has activated and who does not yet have enough information to know what the pattern is pointing toward. Dinner was my favorite meal. I want to describe what that means precisely because the precision matters. My favorite meal is a baked pasta dish, my mother's specific version of it, with a bechamel that has a particular ratio of nutmeg that I have never been able to replicate correctly, and a layer of something underneath the pasta that is hers specifically, and that I have asked about twice over the years, and been given instructions that never quite produce the right result. It takes time. It requires attention. It is not a weeknight dinner. It is the meal my mother made for birthdays when I was young, for Christmas Eve, for the specific occasions that required something that said effort and intention. She had not asked what I wanted for dinner. When I came downstairs, the dish was already on the table, already baked, already portioned, already plated. Mine was at my seat, ready. Lauren was already seated. My mother carried her own plate from the kitchen and sat down and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face in 30 years. Soft, open, something that on another person's face I would have called love without hesitation. On my mother's face, it was the most disorienting thing I had ever seen. She said, "I made your favorite. I've been meaning to for a while." I looked at the plate. The smell was exactly right. Exactly the version I had been trying to recreate in Chicago for years. She had made it perfectly, which she always did, but the fact of its presence on this particular Thursday, for no occasion, placed in front of me before I had chosen to sit, was producing a dissonance I could not locate the source of. Lauren said, "She's been planning this since you said you were coming." I said it smelled wonderful. I picked up my fork. I looked at the plate, and then I did not eat. Not because I made a decision not to. The decision was not conscious. It was more like the instinctive hesitation of someone whose hand reaches for something and then pauses because something below conscious awareness has registered something that the conscious mind has not yet processed. I moved the food around the plate. I ate a small amount, a forkful, maybe two. I made the sounds of appreciation at the right intervals. I participated in the dinner conversation, which was warm and easy in a way that dinner conversation in this house had never been warm and easy. My mother asked about my friends in Chicago. Lauren asked about a project I had mentioned on the phone 6 weeks ago, which meant she had been listening to that call more carefully than I had understood her to be listening. I pushed the food around my plate. My mother looked at my plate twice. The second time she looked, something moved across her expression very briefly before the composed surface returned. Not concern, something more precise than concern, something that was tracking a variable and had found the variable behaving unexpectedly. After dinner, I helped clear the table. I complimented the meal again. I said I was tired from the drive and went upstairs at 9:30. I lay in the dark. I thought about my mother's hand on my face. I thought about sweetheart. I thought about Lauren's hug and the attentiveness of her questions, and the way she had been listening to a phone call 6 weeks ago with more care than the call seemed to warrant. I thought about a plate that was ready before I sat down. And then, through the floor, clear and controlled in the register my mother used for situations that were not producing the expected outcome. Why didn't she eat it? A pause. She just kept pushing it around. I lay completely still, and I understood that the warmth that had greeted me at the door, the hand on my face, the favorite meal, the sweetheart, none of it had arrived because something in my family had changed. It had arrived because something about me had changed, something I did not yet know about, something that had made me, for the first time in 30 years, worth the effort of a perfect dinner. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark, and I thought about what could make a woman who had never called her daughter sweetheart start calling her sweetheart. And I thought about a meal made with that much care, placed on the table before I sat down, watched with that specific attention while I ate. And I thought about the question through the floor, why didn't she eat it? Not why didn't she enjoy it? Not why wasn't she hungry? Why didn't she eat it? As though the eating was the point, as though something had depended on it. I did not know yet what that something was, but I understood lying in the dark in my childhood bedroom that I needed to find out before I ate another meal in this house, and before I let my mother put her hand on my face again. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark until the house went fully quiet, and then I lay there longer, thinking in the particular organized way I think when a problem has presented itself, and my mind has decided the problem requires immediate structural analysis rather than rest. The question through the floor, why didn't she eat it? Not a mother's concern about a daughter with no appetite after a long drive. The register was wrong for that. I had heard my mother's concerned register my entire life, and it had a different quality, a softer edge, a genuine inquiry at the center of it. What had come through the floor was the register she used when an outcome had not been produced and she was assessing why. Operational, evaluative, not why isn't she hungry, why didn't the plan work? I understood the distinction by 2 in the morning. By 3, I had connected it to the warmth at the door and the hand on my face and Lauren's hug and the attentiveness of the questions, and the meal that had been ready before I sat down, and the watching while I ate. I lay there and I assembled these things into a sequence, and I looked at the sequence and I asked myself the question I asked in my professional life when a sequence of events presented itself without an obvious explanation. What would make this sequence of events make sense? What single fact, if introduced, would cause all of these behaviors to be rational rather than random? I did not have the answer at 3 in the morning, but I had the shape of it, and the shape was enough to tell me that I needed information before I did anything else. Before I came downstairs, before I sat at the table, before I picked up a fork. I came down at 7. My mother was already in the kitchen. She looked up when I came in, and the warmth arrived immediately, the specific, practiced warmth that had been present since I walked through the door, and she said, "Good morning, sweetheart," and asked how I had slept. I said I had slept well. She said breakfast was almost ready. I said I wasn't hungry yet. I said I wanted to take a walk first and clear my head after the long drive. I said it with the easy manner of someone who was simply describing a preference, not someone who had been awake since midnight assembling a sequence of events into something that was making the hair on the back of her neck respond. She said, of course. She said the air was crisp. She said breakfast would keep. I put on my coat and I left the house. I walked 2 blocks and then I sat in my car and I called a name I had in my phone from a professional context. A colleague who worked in toxicology consulting for litigation cases, a woman named Dr. Susan Park, who I had worked with twice on cases involving financial fraud with chemical components. Not a friend, exactly. A professional contact with a particular expertise. She answered on the 4th ring, which was surprising for 7 in the morning. I said, "I need to ask you a hypothetical." She said, "Go ahead." I said, "If someone wanted to make a person sick, gradually, over multiple exposures, in a way that would present as natural illness rather than poisoning, what would they use?" A pause. She said, "How gradual?" I said, "Slow, progressive, something that would be difficult to detect without specifically testing for it." She said, "There are several compounds. Some require access to controlled substances, which creates a trail. Others are available in forms that don't. What's the delivery method in your hypothetical?" I said, "Food." A longer pause. She said, "Claire, is this actually a hypothetical?" I said, "I don't know yet. I need to understand the landscape before I know what I'm looking at." She said, "If it's food and the goal is gradual accumulation without obvious acute symptoms, you're looking at things like heavy metals at low doses or certain compounds that mimic natural illness progression. The thing that makes them hard to detect is that the symptoms present as other things: fatigue, digestive issues, declining health that looks like stress or a developing condition." I said, "How would you test for it?" She said, "Hair sample. Blood panel with specific markers, and if you have access to the food itself, a direct sample test is the most definitive." I said, "How quickly could results come back?" She said, "For a food sample, 72 hours if you use a private lab and pay for expedited processing." I said, "Send me the lab information." She sent it before I had finished the sentence. I went back inside. Breakfast was on the table, eggs, toast, orange juice already poured. My plate was at my seat, already served, already ready. I looked at the plate and I said I had gotten a call on my walk, a work situation that needed attention, and that I needed to deal with it quickly before I could eat. I said I was sorry. I said it smelled wonderful. My mother said, of course. She said it would keep. Lauren watched me from across the table with an expression she smoothed into casual disappointment before it fully formed. I went upstairs with my phone and I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought about what I was about to do and whether I was doing it from evidence or from a pattern, and whether those two things, in this specific situation, were different enough to matter. I decided they were not different enough. I went back downstairs 20 minutes later. I said the work situation was handled. I said I was sorry about the eggs, but I wasn't quite hungry yet. I said I had picked up something on my walk, a protein bar from my bag, and I gestured vaguely in the direction of having already eaten. My mother said that was fine. Her eyes went to my untouched plate for exactly 1 second before returning to her coffee. 1 second. The precision of that glance, the specific duration of someone checking a variable rather than reacting to a situation. I said I was going to shower, and then I thought we could do something together, maybe lunch out. My treat. My mother said that sounded lovely. I went upstairs. I took the plate of eggs with me. I told them I was bringing it up to eat while I got ready. I packed the sample the way Susan had instructed, small container sealed, labeled with the date and time. I put it in my bag inside a Ziploc inside a second container. I arranged to have it picked up by a courier service that Susan had connected me with, a service that operated specifically for medical and legal sample transport, discreet and documented in it. The courier came to the end of the street. I walked down to meet him. I was back inside within 8 minutes. We went to lunch. My mother and Lauren and I sat at a restaurant table, and my mother was warm and attentive and asked questions about my life with the specific interest of someone who had decided that interest was what the situation required. I ate a salad I had ordered myself from a menu I had chosen. I watched my water glass, which had been filled by a server and not touched by anyone at the table before it reached me. I ate my salad. I watched them watch me eat. There was a quality to their attention at that lunch table that was different from the quality of normal attention, not constantly observant, but periodically checking, with the frequency of people monitoring something. My plate, my glass, whether I was finishing what was in front of me. I finished everything. Lauren visibly relaxed when I finished. I noted that. That night I called James Caldwell. I had his number from Miriam's estate process, and I had his name in my phone under estate attorney because I had been meaning to have a follow-up conversation about the inheritance structure and had not yet scheduled it. I scheduled it now for Monday morning. I said it was important. He said he could make Monday work. I said, I also need to ask you something now before Monday. If I died without a will and without named beneficiaries on the inherited accounts, what would happen to Miriam's estate. The pause that followed was the pause of someone shifting from scheduling mode to serious mode. He said, "Intestate succession. Everything would pass to your closest living relatives." I said, "My mother and sister." He said, "Yes, equally." I said, "How much would they receive?" He said, "The full amount, 4.2 million. I said, "James, I need you to understand something. I am currently at my mother's house. I have been here for approximately 36 hours. I have not eaten any food prepared in this house. I have sent a food sample to a private toxicology lab for expedited analysis. The results will be back in 72 hours. A very long pause. Then James Caldwell said, with the measured precision of a man who had been practicing estate law for 30 years and had heard most things, "I see." I said, "I need everything restructured before I leave this house." He said, "I'll have documents ready for Monday. Come to my office directly. Do not tell anyone where you're going." I said, "I know." He said, "Claire, be careful about what you consume until you have the results." I said, "I already am." The 72 hours were the most precise days I've ever lived. I moved through the house with the practiced normalcy of someone who has decided that normalcy is the most important performance of their life at this specific moment. I ate food I controlled entirely, sealed items from a pharmacy 3 miles away, purchased on an errand I invented, consumed in my car or in the privacy of the bathroom. I drank from sealed bottles I had brought in my bag. I poured liquids away and said I had finished them. My mother cooked twice more. Both times I ate a small amount and then claimed fullness or a stomach that was still adjusting from the drive. Both times I watched the specific quality of attention my mother and Lauren paid to how much I consumed. Both times that attention had the character of monitoring. On Sunday evening, Lauren appeared in the doorway of my room while I was reading and said she was glad I was home and that she felt like they had been missing out on knowing me. She said it with warmth that was well produced. I said I felt the same way. She said, "You should come back more, or we could come to Chicago. We could do a weekend." I said that sounded wonderful. She said, "We love you, Claire. I know we haven't always been great at showing it, but we do." I looked at my sister, 34 years old, the woman who had grown up in the warmth of this household while I had grown up in its managed periphery, the woman who had never once in 30 years said, "We love you, Claire. I know we haven't always been great at showing it." The woman who had said she just kept pushing it around through a floor while she thought I was sleeping. I said, "I know, Lauren. I love you too." She smiled and left the room. I waited until I heard her on the stairs. Then I opened my phone. The lab results had arrived. I read them once, then I read them again, the way I read things when I need to be certain I am reading what I think I am reading. Then I sat on the edge of my childhood bed and I held my phone in both hands, and I felt something move through me that was not panic, and was not grief, and was not anger exactly. It was the specific internal sensation of a hypothesis being confirmed that you had been hoping, with everything that was still childlike and hopeful in you, was wrong. The sample contained a compound, a specific compound identified clearly in the lab report with its chemical name and its properties and the concentration at which it had been found. A compound that Susan Park had described to me on the phone as one of the things that mimics natural illness progression, that accumulates gradually, that produces fatigue and digestive symptoms and declining health that looks like stress or a developing condition, that at sufficient concentration over sufficient time produces outcomes that present as natural causes. In my eggs, at 7 in the morning, prepared by my mother, ready on the table before I sat down. I sat with the lab report on my phone and I thought about $4.2 million and a default inheritance structure and a woman who had called me sweetheart for the first time in my life. And I thought about Monday morning and James Caldwell's office and the documents he was preparing, and I thought about Friday dinner, which I was already planning, because I needed one more thing before I could end this. I needed my mother to tell me, in her own words, in her own voice, who she actually was, and I had a way to make her do exactly that. I drove to James Caldwell's office Monday morning at 8:55. I had told my mother I had a work call that required privacy and that I would be back by noon. She had smiled and said, "Take your time," and handed me a travel mug of coffee she had made. I set it on the passenger seat. I did not drink from it. I drove to James's office and I sat across from his desk and I placed my phone on the surface between us with the lab report open on the screen. He read it without speaking. When he finished, he looked up at me with the specific expression of a man who has spent 30 years in estate law and has developed the capacity to receive significant information without visible disturbance, and who is currently at the outer edge of that capacity. He said, "This is a certified private lab result." I said yes. He said, "This is evidence of a criminal act." I said, "I know." He said, "Claire, you understand that what this report documents is not a civil matter." I said, "I understand. I also understand that a single food sample, however clearly documented, will be characterized by any defense as contamination or error without corroborating evidence. I need something that cannot be characterized that way." He looked at me. I said, "I need her to tell me." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What are you planning?" I told him. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "The legal restructuring first. Everything else second. You do not sit at that table without the estate documents already executed." I said, "Agreed." We spent 2 hours in his office. When I left, everything had changed. A comprehensive trust structure with an independent trustee, named beneficiaries, a foundation Miriam had supported, and 2 personal friends in Chicago with no family connection. A will consistent with the trust. A letter of instruction for James's file, detailed and specific, describing every meal, every watching glance, every deviation from 30 years of established family pattern, and the lab report attached as an exhibit. A directive that in the event of my death under any circumstances, a full independent investigation was to be initiated and no distribution was to occur until it was complete. James also contacted a colleague, a criminal attorney named David Shore, who listened to a summary of the situation in James's office and said, with the measured precision of someone evaluating a case, "The lab report establishes the what. What she needs is evidence of the who and the intent. The recording she's describing, if executed correctly, provides both." He said, "I'll be available by phone Friday evening." I said, "I'll call you." I drove back to the house. I came in through the front door, and my mother looked up from the kitchen and smiled and asked how the call had gone. I said it had gone well. I said I was feeling better about some things. I said I had been thinking that I needed to stop being so absent from the family and that I wanted to make more of an effort. She put down what she was holding and looked at me with the warmth that had been present since I arrived and said, "That means everything to me." I said, "I thought maybe Friday we could have a real dinner, just us. I could help cook." She said, "I would love that." I said, "The pasta again, your version. I've been trying to recreate it in Chicago for years and I can never get it right." She said she would make it. I said, "Can we make it together this time? I want to actually learn it." A brief pause. Then she said, "Of course." She said she would show me everything. I said, "Perfect." I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I thought about Friday with the focused attention of someone who has one chance to do something correctly and understands exactly what correctly means. Friday arrived with the specific quality of significant days, which is that they look like any other day until they don't. I came downstairs at 4. My mother was already in the kitchen. I stood beside her at the counter and she walked me through the recipe with the patience of someone who had decided that patience was what the moment required. She showed me the bechamel. She showed me the layering. She talked me through the proportions. I watched everything. I also watched what she added when she thought my attention was on something else. It was not something that came from the spice rack. It came from a small container in the back of the refrigerator, added to my portion specifically in the 30 seconds when she believed I had turned to get something from the other counter. I had not turned fully away. I saw it. I did not react. I said the sauce smelled exactly right. I said I finally understood what I had been missing in my Chicago version. She smiled. We sat down to dinner at 6:30. My plate was in front of me. Lauren was across the table. My mother sat at the head, composed, warm, the version of herself she had been performing since I walked through the door the previous Thursday. I looked at the plate, then I looked at my mother. I said, "Before we eat, I want to share something with you both." My mother's expression held. I said, "I met with my estate attorney on Monday. I've established a full trust structure, named beneficiaries, independent trustee, everything documented and executed." Lauren's hand stopped moving. I said, "The beneficiaries are a charitable foundation and 2 friends in Chicago. The independent trustee is a professional fiduciary firm with no family connection. Everything is protected and everything is in place." My mother said, "That's very sensible." She said it with warmth, still performing, still holding the surface. I said, "I also want you to hear something." I placed my phone on the table. I pressed play on the recording from the previous Thursday night. My mother's voice came through the speaker, tight, controlled. "Why didn't she eat it?" A pause. Lauren's voice quieter. "She just kept pushing it around." I stopped the recording. The kitchen was completely silent. Then I placed a second item on the table. The lab report. I placed it facing my mother and I let her read it. I watched her read it. She read it twice, the same way I had read it, the way people read things when they are confirming what they are seeing, rather than trying to understand it for the first time. She already understood it. She was confirming that I had found it. The kitchen was silent for a long time. Then my mother set the lab report on the table, and she looked at me with the composed, controlled expression she used for situations that required management. The warmth was gone. There was nothing performing behind her eyes now, just the actual face of the woman who had looked at $4.2 million and made a calculation. She said, "You weren't supposed to make this difficult." Not, "I don't know what that report means." Not, "There must be an explanation." Not, "How could you think this of me?" Just that you weren't supposed to make this difficult. I looked at my mother, 57 years old. The woman who had held my hand at the doctor when I was small and attended my school performances and said "I love you" at the end of phone calls. The woman who had called me sweetheart for the first time in 30 years because the circumstances had required the word. No guilt on her face, no fear. Just the specific irritation of someone whose plan has encountered a structural problem they had not adequately accounted for. I said, "I know." I said it quietly, without anger, because I had processed the anger in the 72 hours between the lab results and this moment, and what was left on the other side of it was not emptiness but clarity, the specific clarity of seeing something completely for the first time after 30 years of seeing it partially. I said, "I want you to understand what exists now. The lab report is with my attorney. A copy is with a criminal attorney named David Shore, who is available by phone tonight if I need him. The letter of instruction in my estate file documents every meal, every watching glance, every moment of the past 11 days in specific detail. The recording is backed up in 3 locations. James Caldwell has a complete copy of everything." Lauren said, "Claire," I said, "I'm not finished." She stopped. I said, "If anything happens to me, under any circumstances, under any description, a full independent criminal investigation opens immediately. David Shore initiates it personally. James Caldwell freezes every distribution. The investigation runs to its complete conclusion before a single dollar moves anywhere." I looked at my mother. I said, "And when it runs to its complete conclusion, based on the documentation that already exists, you receive nothing. Not from Miriam's estate, not from anything I have built or will build. Nothing. Ever." My mother looked at the lab report on the table. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she said, "You've thought about this carefully." I said, "I have." She said nothing else. Lauren was crying quietly. Not for me. I want to be honest about that. The tears were the tears of someone whose understanding of a situation had just been permanently revised, and who did not know what to do with the revision. She had followed, she had complied, she had said she just kept pushing it around through a floor while I was sleeping. The tears were real, but they were about Lauren, not about me. I stood up, I picked up my bag, I picked up the lab report, I left the pasta on the table untouched. I walked out of the kitchen and through the hallway and out the front door, and I stood on the front step for one moment in the cold November air, and I breathed. Then I got in my car. I drove back to Chicago. 3 months later, a text arrived from my mother. Same composed tone, same warmth in the language. She hoped I was well. She said she missed me. She said the door was always open. I read it once. I deleted it, not with anger, with the clean, completed motion of someone who has finished something and has no reason to return to it. I drove to my mother's house for a weekend and found warmth where there had never been warmth, and a meal prepared before I sat down, and 2 women watching my plate with the specific attention of people monitoring a variable. I heard a question through a floor that told me the warmth was not warmth. I did not eat the food. I sent a sample to a lab. I called an attorney at 7 in the morning from a parking spot 2 blocks away. I executed a complete estate structure that removed every financial incentive. I received a lab report that confirmed what my instinct had already told me. I sat at the same kitchen table on a Friday evening, and I placed a recording and a lab report in front of my mother, and I said what was true in plain language. She told me I wasn't supposed to make it difficult. I left. I drove back to Chicago. 3 months later, I deleted a text. That is the whole story. Now here's what I want to leave with you. The people who never gave you warmth and then suddenly did, pay attention to the timing. Warmth that arrives with the specific timing of a financial event is not warmth. It is a strategy wearing warmth's clothing. And the difference between those 2 things is not always visible immediately, but it is always visible eventually if you are paying attention to the pattern rather than the performance. The second thing is harder. My mother did not change when the money arrived. She revealed herself. There is a difference between those 2 things that matters enormously. The inheritance did not make her capable of this. She was always capable of this. The money simply raised the stakes high enough that the maintenance of the performance cost more than it was worth. What that means, in practical terms, is this. If someone has never made you feel like the most important person in the room, and then suddenly they do, ask yourself what changed. Not in them, in your circumstances. Because people who genuinely love you do not require a trigger, and people who have been waiting for the right trigger will always find one eventually. Trust your instincts before you have proof. Because the instinct, in my experience, arrives before the evidence. And in some situations, the instinct is the only thing that keeps you alive long enough to find it. Have you ever felt something was wrong before you could prove it? That quiet alarm in your body that arrived before your mind had caught up. I want to know. Tell me in the comments. Tell me your first name and your city. Tell me whether you listened to it. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. I will be here, and I will have already checked what is on the table before I sit down.